The room wasn't ready for what his voice was about to become. August 14th, 1976, Westlake Recording Studio, Los Angeles. I remember that night the way people remember a tremor, not because it destroys anything, but because it reminds you how small you are when the ground decides to shift under your feet. The clock above the mixing board blinked 11:47 p.m. in a faint red glow, the kind of glow that makes everything feel more secretive than it really is. The studio lights were dimmed low, not intentionally. It was just how we tended to work back then, letting the shadows settle in the corners while the music filled everything else. I stood behind the glass in the control room, fingertips pressed to the edge of the console, watching my younger brother Michael prepare for another take. He was 18 and already carrying that quiet storm inside him. You could see it in his posture, the straight spine, the still shoulders, the way he kept rolling his wrists like he was warming up some invisible fire inside his chest. The rest of the team shuffled around him, whispering settings and notes, but I could tell he didn't hear any of it. He was someplace deeper, someplace only he knew how to reach. The air felt unusually heavy that night, like the studio itself was crouched in anticipation. Even the walls, lined with foam to swallow sound, felt like they were holding their breath. I had a bad feeling. One of those thin, persistent instincts that crawls up your spine when you sense something is about to stretch past its limit. Michael had been pushing himself for hours, layering harmonies, refining inflections, sharpening each phrase until it cut clean. His voice was already glowing with that unmistakable tension, a sign I recognized all too well. He was riding the edge, but telling Michael to stop was like telling the tide it had done enough crashing for the night. He stepped up to the mic, adjusting it a single inch lower. His fingers trembled, though not from fear. Determination can look a lot like trembling if you don't know the difference. I knew the difference. He wasn't nervous, he was locked in. Too locked in. Behind me, one of the engineers cleared his throat. "You think we should call it for the night?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I should have. But something about the moment, about the way Michael tilted his head like he was listening to a sound no one else could hear, kept me silent. I felt like any interruption from me would break whatever spell he was conjuring. Michael inhaled slowly, letting the air gather inside him like he was preparing to lift something impossibly heavy. For a split second he looked so still, so crystalline, that I wondered if he was hesitating. But no, this was the calm before impact. When the instrumental track rolled in through the speakers, low and steady, the room seemed to exhale. Michael closed his eyes, and everything in me tightened. His first note sliced through the stillness with a clarity that made my pulse jump. It wasn't just singing, it was a blade of sound, sharp and precise. But underneath, I heard it. A slight strain, barely audible, but to me, unmistakable. His voice wasn't faltering, it was fighting. He pushed into the second verse, and his tone started to shift from clean to something rougher, a kind of urgency that felt almost dangerous. Each phrase carried a little more weight, a little more pressure on the fragile muscles of his throat. He knew it. I knew it. But he didn't stop. My palms had started sweating. I wiped them on my jeans, pretending I was just tired, pretending I wasn't watching him walk a tightrope no one else seemed aware of. The producer leaned forward. "That's different," he murmured. Different wasn't the word, it was volatile. Michael moved into the pre-chorus, and I watched the tension ripple across his neck, a tiny, tightening flicker. He swallowed hard, lifted his chin, and went for the climb. That climb. The room contracted around me. The air felt thinner. Every sound seemed to stretch and slow. I could hear his breath catch, felt the pressure in my own throat, as if my body was trying to absorb the strain for him. He hit the high note, clear, bright, perfect, and for a brief second I thought everything would be fine. But perfection is a fragile thing. On the next beat his voice wavered, just a hair, just enough for me to sense the edge cracking. He held the note anyway, forcing it, shaping it, pulling more than he should have from a throat that had already given too much. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Stop," I wanted to say. "Please stop." But I stood there, silent, paralyzed. The final phrase arrived, the one he had been chasing all night. He aimed for it like an arrow. His voice surged upward. And then something shifted. Not a break, not a collapse. More like a sudden tightening, a hitch that made the entire room tilt. He finished the line, but the sound wasn't smooth. It carried a rawness, a strain that felt like it had been wrung from him rather than sung. When the music cut out, the silence that followed was brutal, heavy, almost accusatory. Nobody spoke. Behind the glass, Michael stood very still, one hand hovering near his throat, not pressing, just aware. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. The dim light hit his face at an angle that made his exhaustion look sharper, more fragile. I felt a chill crawl from my shoulders down my spine. Something had shifted in that take. Something I couldn't name yet but felt deep in my bones. The room still hadn't breathed, and I knew, without knowing how, that whatever had just happened, we weren't ready for the truth of it. The moment the final note dissolved into the heavy midnight air, the studio fell into a silence so sharp it felt almost physical, like the quiet after a door slams in an empty hallway. I didn't move. None of us did. It was as if the whole room had been locked inside that last sound Michael forced out of himself, and now we were stuck in the echo of something we couldn't yet understand. Beyond the glass, he stood motionless in the recording booth, one hand hovering a breath away from his throat, not touching it, not massaging it, just near it, like he wasn't sure whether acknowledging the discomfort would make it worse. His head tilted slightly downward, curls casting shadows over his eyes. He inhaled, but the breath shook in a way that twisted something deep in my chest. A quiet dread settled over me. Not dramatic, not loud, just cold, creeping, precise. The engineer, closest to me, finally spoke, his voice cracking through the silence like a brittle twig. Did you hear that strain at the end? I didn't answer, because if I said yes, if I admitted I heard it, I'd also have to admit I saw it coming long before the note arrived, long before he stepped into that booth. The truth was a weight I wasn't ready to lift. Michael lifted his chin slightly, eyes still closed, as if trying to steady himself from the inside out. I thought he might stumble. My hand moved toward the door handle before I even realized it, but I stopped midway. Something told me he didn't want rescue. Not yet. The producer slowly raised a finger, signaling for us not to rush in. His voice dropped to a whisper. Give him a moment, as if time meant the same thing for him as it did for the rest of us. Inside the booth, the air must have felt tighter than the headphones pressed against his ears. He always carried the music like a living thing inside him, something that demanded devotion, demanded pieces of him. And tonight, I feared, it had taken more than he meant to give. His eyes opened at last, slowly, as if the world had become too bright. He blinked once, twice. When he exhaled, the sound wasn't pain exactly, but it wasn't comfort either. I could sense the shift happening inside him, the internal calculation, the stubbornness, the need, the fire. He reached up and removed one side of his headphones, letting them hang loosely against his shoulder. He wasn't looking at any of us. He wasn't even looking at the mic. He was listening to something internal, something private. Then his throat tightened again, not visibly, but I saw the swallow, the hesitation that came after, the faint wince that lasted less than half a second, a flicker, a whisper of vulnerability. That was when fear brushed against the back of my neck. I pushed open the control room door before anyone could stop me. The hinges groaned in protest, drowning out the soft hum of the equipment. Everyone turned. No one tried to intervene. The walkway to the booth felt strangely long, like the floor had stretched itself to test my resolve. The room carried the scent of warm electronics and something else, anticipation mixed with unease. As I reached the booth door, my hand hovered over the metal handle. It felt cold, out of harmony with the heat rising in my chest. Through the small square window, I could see him standing still, shoulders rising and falling in shallow breaths. I opened the door. A rush of cooler air touched my face as I stepped inside. Michael didn't turn immediately. He kept one hand rested lightly against the mic stand, as if grounding himself. His voice, when it broke the silence, was soft, too soft. That didn't sound right, did it? The quiet honesty in his tone caught me off guard. Michael rarely voiced uncertainty. Even at 18, he carried an intensity most people never grow into. I took a careful step closer. It was powerful, I said, keeping my voice steady, but you pushed too hard on that last phrase. His jaw tightened. I had to. No, I whispered. You wanted to. His eyes lifted to meet mine. In them, I saw exhaustion layered over determination, a dangerous pairing, one I recognized far too well. It was the look of someone who believed the only acceptable performance was one that demanded everything from him. Even when everything meant too much, he tried to speak again, but the moment the sound formed, something clutched at his voice. Not pain, just strain. That almost made it worse. Pain you can react to, strain you can ignore, and ignoring it is what gets you hurt. I rested a hand gently on his shoulder. You need a break. His lips curved into a faint, stubborn smile. A break won't fix the part I'm trying to reach. Maybe not, I said quietly, but pushing like this won't either. He looked away, gaze drifting to the floor as if the answer he wanted was written in the grain of the wood. I saw the conflict inside him, saw the ambition wrestling with the emerging worry, saw him weighing the cost of one more attempt. Outside the booth, I could feel the tension from the team watching us, their silhouettes blurred behind the glass. They didn't know whether to hope he'd keep singing or pray he wouldn't. Michael finally pressed 2 fingers to his throat, not firmly, just enough to test the tightness there. His expression didn't shift, but something inside me did. A quiet panic bloomed beneath my ribs. "Jackie," he murmured, "I'm fine." But the tremor, so slight it barely existed, betrayed him. "No," I whispered, "you're not." For a moment, neither of us moved. The studio hummed faintly around us, the world trying to resume its rhythm, even though both of us knew something had fractured that night, something subtle but real. He took a small breath, then another, both measured, controlled. And when he looked up again, his eyes held a question I wasn't ready for. What if that last take was the one? I didn't answer, because the truth, the one I felt tightening like a wire in my chest, terrified me. If that was the take, then the cost of it had just begun revealing itself. The seconds after his question stretched thin, fragile, like a wire pulled so tight you could almost hear it threaten to snap. What if that last take was the one? The echo of Michael's voice hung between us, soft but heavy enough to tilt the entire room. The faint studio hum vibrated through the booth floor, but everything else, every breath, every sound, every instinct, had fallen into a strange, suspended quiet. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because for the first time that night, I wasn't afraid of the take being good. I was afraid of what it took from him to make it good. Michael looked at me, eyes steady but shadowed by something I couldn't quite read. Stubbornness, exhaustion, fear, a mix of all three. His fingers drifted from his throat, returning to his side with a kind of hesitant grace, as if moving too quickly might provoke another unwelcome sensation. The booth felt colder now, though the temperature hadn't changed. The air had simply shifted, turned denser, more alert, as if even the oxygen sensed that something irreversible had begun unraveling beneath the surface. Behind the glass, a cluster of silhouettes watched us with that hushed concentration people get when they're afraid to name what they're seeing. One of the engineers leaned forward, elbow on the console, the faint glow of the control panel lights cutting sharp angles across his face. His worry mirrored mine. I reached up and slid one of the headphones off Michael's shoulder. "You need to rest your voice," I said, trying to keep my tone measured. "Just for tonight." He tilted his head, not dismissing the suggestion, but not accepting it either. His silence wasn't refusal, it was calculation. "I didn't lose control," he murmured. "I just pushed too far, that's all." "That is control slipping," I shot back, softer than I intended but fiercer than he expected. His eyes flickered, a tiny flash of vulnerability. Then he masked it, quick, practiced, almost instinctive. "You heard how close I was to what we've been chasing," he whispered. "I can get it cleaner if I..." "No." The word cut through the booth like a blade, sharper than I intended, necessary all the same. He inhaled slow, deeper this time, testing, measuring, listening inward. That move, the quiet evaluation, scared me more than the strain itself. It meant he already felt something he didn't want to admit. The producer's voice crackled through the overhead speaker, gentle but stern. "Michael, let's step out of the booth for a minute." A long pause. For a heartbeat, I thought he might argue. His jaw clenched, a subtle line forming just beneath the cheekbone. His hand brushed the mic stand, fingers curling around the cold metal as if it were an anchor. Then he exhaled, short, frustrated, surrendering not to the producer, but to the moment. "Fine," he said, though the word trembled faintly at the edges. I pushed the booth door open wider. "Come on," I murmured. "Just a break." He stepped past me, movements controlled, but slightly slower than usual. Not limping, not faltering, just cautious, as if he wasn't sure how much his voice had tightened, or whether the tightness might worsen if he ignored it. The studio beyond the booth was dim, lights low enough to blur the polished edges of equipment and cables. Everything looked longer, darker, stretched, like the night itself had elongated, waiting for whatever came next. As he walked into the room, the crew straightened instinctively. No one spoke. The air thickened with the kind of silence people reserve for church pews or hospital corridors. He gave them a small nod, a forced reassurance. I'm okay. But the room didn't believe him. Neither did I. I caught the subtle rasp in his throat as he swallowed. A quiet drag of breath that didn't belong in an 18-year-old who'd been singing his whole life. A drag that signaled strain, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The engineer nearest the console cleared his throat. That last take, he started carefully, what was incredible, but it sounded like you. I'm fine. Michael cut in, gentle but firm. The engineer stopped mid-sentence. Michael sank onto the edge of a low couch near the wall, elbows resting on his knees. He clasped his hands together, fingers interlocked tight, knuckles pale. His shoulders rose with a deep breath, then dropped with a silent tension that rippled through him like an aftershock. When he finally looked up at me, something in his expression shifted. Small, but enough to rattle me. Did it scare you? He asked. The question hit harder than any note he'd sung that night. Scare me how? I managed. He hesitated. Then, the way my voice sounded at the end. There it was, the truth wrapped in a whisper. Yeah, I admitted. It did. He blinked, slow, waited, not hurt, not surprised, just thoughtful, as if my honesty confirmed something he already suspected but needed someone else to say aloud. He leaned back against the couch, head tipping slightly against the wall. The faint light caught the worry flickering across his face, an emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see. I felt it, he said quietly. Right here. His fingers brushed the side of his neck. A chill swept through me. Michael, I said, sitting beside him, you hit the take. Whether it's the one or not, we can figure that out later. But right now, you need to stop before that strain becomes something worse. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he didn't speak, didn't move. Then he exhaled, slow, conflicted, restrained. Maybe you're right, he said, barely audible. But I didn't want that to be the moment where my voice faltered. His voice didn't falter, but something inside him had. And the worst part was, I knew this was only the beginning. The moment hung between us like a flickering bulb, unsteady, humming with something unseen. Michael leaned back against the couch, eyes half closed, the shadows in the studio settling around him like a second skin. I watched him breathe, too carefully, too measured, as if each inhale had become something he needed to negotiate with his own body. My chest tightened with the weight of everything unsaid. The producer finally exhaled, a long, uneasy sound, and stepped toward us. Let's play the last take, he murmured to the engineer, low volume. The engineer hesitated as if he were afraid the playback itself might somehow make things worse, but he nodded, fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the controls. The room dimmed when the track rolled back. The opening bars flowed out smooth, effortless, nothing like the tension currently thickening the air. Then Michael's voice entered. Even knowing what was coming didn't prepare me. Each layer of his vocal climbed with that unmistakable brilliance, shimmering with precision. But underneath, now that I knew where to listen, I heard the early signs of strain, small cracks hidden behind the beauty, hairline fractures forming under pressure. The others heard it too. I could feel it in the way they shifted, in the way no one met anyone else's eyes. Then the take reached the final line, the moment everything inside him had tightened around. That note, the one he forced, the one that cost him more than any of us realized, slid out of the speakers like a blade dipped in silk. Beautiful, raw, dangerously fragile. When the playback ended, the room didn't echo with admiration. It echoed with fear. Michael opened his eyes. Play it again, he said softly. I stepped forward before anyone else could react. No, not yet. His gaze snapped to mine, not angry, not defiant, but burning with the kind of intensity that made the air pulse. He wasn't used to being stopped, not in the studio. Music was his battlefield and sanctuary, and I had just yanked him away from the front line. Jackie, he whispered, you don't understand. That note, I heard that note, I interrupted, and the problem is you did too, in your throat. The muscles in his jaw twitched, a tremor, small but telling. One of the engineers shifted nervously behind us. "It really might be the take," he said cautiously, just with a little unwanted texture on the last phrase. Unwanted texture. A soft way of saying, he pushed too far. A softer way of saying the truth we were all avoiding. Michael rubbed the heel of his hand gently against his throat, not pressing, just acknowledging the tension lingering there. He wasn't in pain, but he wasn't fine either. The uncertainty crawling across his features was something I had never seen on him, not like this, not with this depth. It frightened me in a way the strain itself hadn't. "All I wanted," he whispered, "was clarity." "And you almost lost it," I replied. He looked away. That was all the admission I needed. The producer cleared his throat, trying to anchor the moment. "Let's step outside. Get some air." But no one moved. Not until Michael slowly pushed himself off the couch. The room seemed to tilt with him, as if the floor recognized the shift in his energy. He stood still for a second, grounding himself, then nodded toward the hallway. The corridor outside the studio was dim, lit only by a flickering overhead bulb. The distant hum of a vending machine buzzed through the quiet. The studio, usually alive with motion and chatter, now felt like the backstage of a theater moments before a tragedy or triumph, no one sure which way the narrative would bend. He walked ahead of us, steps steady but too quiet. I followed him. The others stayed behind, giving us space or maybe giving themselves room to process what they'd just heard. Halfway down the hall, Michael stopped. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, shoulders rising and falling with breaths that were no longer as smooth as before. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely louder than a secret. I felt something tighten, just for a moment. A chill swept through me, cold enough to reach bone. "How tight?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. He hesitated, then, enough that I noticed, enough that it scared me. The confession hit me like a jolt. Michael didn't admit fear easily, especially not fear tied to the one thing that defined him more than anything else. I stepped beside him. "You're not alone in this." He didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, unfocused, as if he were staring into a version of the future he wasn't sure he wanted to meet. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked, just slightly, but enough to twist the knife of worry deeper into me. "If that strain means something's happening to my voice and I don't know what I'll do." "Nothing's happening," I said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's just overwork. You've been pushing too hard." But the look he turned on me told me he wasn't convinced, and worse, neither was I. Before I could say anything else, the producer called from down the hall. "Jackie, we need you for a second." I didn't want to leave him, not now, but Michael gave a small nod. "Go," he murmured. "I'm okay." He wasn't. Not in the ways that mattered. I stepped away reluctantly, each footfall heavier than the last. When I looked back, he hadn't moved. He stood in the dim hallway, head bowed slightly, hand hovering near his throat again, and that hovering, that small, hesitant, uncertain gesture, told me something unsettling. This night had changed something inside him, and whatever had shifted was only beginning to reveal itself. The hallway felt colder when I left him standing there, as if the building itself sensed the shift in him and was bracing for whatever came next. The producer's voice echoed down the corridor, urgent but muffled, and the moment I stepped back into the control room, the entire team turned toward me with the same expression, tight-jawed concern, hidden behind professional composure. They didn't need to speak. Their eyes asked the question they were too afraid to voice: "Is he okay?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. The producer gestured me closer. He kept his voice low, the kind of low that doesn't want the walls to overhear. "Jackie, we need to talk about that last take." The room dimmed around me. Not literally, just in that way where the world narrows to a single point. "What about it?" I asked, even though I already knew. He exchanged a look with the engineer, who swallowed hard before pressing play on a loop he'd isolated from the track. 3 seconds of audio, Michael's strained final phrase, played through the speakers. Not the whole line, not the melody, just the sound of pressure, the fragile tremor behind brilliance. When it ended, the silence that followed was sharper than a blade. "That," the engineer whispered, "is not normal fatigue." My pulse kicked. "You're not saying there's damage?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm not qualified to say that, but I am saying we can't let him sing another note tonight." A pause, a long one, a dangerous one. "He'll fight that," I murmured. The producer nodded grimly. "I know. That's why you have to tell him." The words landed heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't just his brother tonight. I was the barrier between him and something he wouldn't admit he feared. A sudden distant shift of air made me turn. The booth door wasn't fully closed. A faint outline moved past the frosted glass window near the hallway. He was pacing. Michael never paced. The producer's hand landed on my arm. "Jackie, go to him, before he talks himself into doing something reckless." I didn't hesitate this time. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, as I stepped back into it. The vending machine's hum sounded louder now, almost eerie in its constancy. A thin strip of flickering light traced the floor. Shadows stretched long across the linoleum tiles, bending with each shift of the overhead bulb. Then I saw him. Michael stood at the far end of the hallway, arms folded tightly across his chest, one hand gripping his elbow, the other hovering near his throat again. His shoulders were tense, his posture composed but trembling slightly under the weight of something internal. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was thinking, and thinking, for him, was often more dangerous than exhaustion. I approached slowly. "Michael," I said, voice low, "we need to talk." He didn't look at me at first. He kept staring at the blank wall in front of him as if it were trying to answer the question he hadn't asked aloud. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than the hum of the fluorescent lights. "You heard it, didn't you?" I didn't play dumb. "Yes." His fingers twitched. Barely a movement, but enough for me to catch. It felt like something closed. He took a shaky breath. Not painful, just too tight, like my voice was trying to stop itself. A cold ripple ran through me. "You're overworked," I insisted. "You've been pushing your limits for hours." He shook his head slightly. "That wasn't hours catching up to me. That was seconds, 1 second. A beat. And I don't know why it happened." His voice cracked gently on the last word, a crack small enough for anyone else to miss. But not me. Never me. I stepped closer. "You're done for tonight. No more singing." He finally met my eyes, really met them, and for the first time that evening, I saw something raw flicker behind his composure. Fear. Not panic, not dread, just a quiet, deep fear of the unknown. "You think I hurt something?" he whispered. "I think you almost could have," I corrected, "and I'm not going to let you go back in there until we know you're okay." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. His jaw tensed, his shoulders squared, a spark of defiance igniting behind his gaze. That spark, his relentless drive, had always propelled him forward, but tonight it frightened me. Then, the spark dimmed. Not extinguished, just softened by something I never expected to hear from him. What if that take was the best I'll get tonight? A beat. What if resting means losing it? He wasn't talking about a single note. He was talking about momentum, about perfection slipping through his fingers. I exhaled slowly. "You won't lose anything. The take is there, we have it, but if you push yourself now, you might lose more than a moment. You might lose your voice." His gaze dropped, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone setting down a weight they don't want anyone to see them carrying. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Firm, grounding. "You're not going back into that booth tonight," I said. "I won't let you." He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't even sigh. He simply nodded, small, reluctant, heavy. As we walked back toward the studio doors, side by side, I felt something shift in him, a subtle unraveling of certainty, a crack in the armor he'd built around his talent. And in that moment, with the dim hallway swallowing our footsteps, an unsettling truth settled deeper into my bones. The real tension of the night wasn't in the booth. It was inside him, growing quietly, stretching tight, and I knew. The next hours would reveal whether that tension would ease or snap.